Europe needs to accelerate its transition into a green economy, and this requires collective efforts from all European institutions, including central banks. Hi, my name is Marie Poff, and I'll be talking about the European Central Bank in the context of the European Green Deal. I'll firstly cover some context, key facts and concepts, then explore how the ECB has incorporated climate considerations into its policy framework, as well as the international dimensions of green central banking. Firstly, some context on central banking. Generally, every nation or region has a central bank responsible for setting its economic and monetary policies to maintain price stability. This is generally done by setting official interest rates to influence the easing or tightening of market conditions and thus influencing inflation. The European Central Bank is, of course, the EU's central institution and forms part of the euro system along with other national central banks whose currency is the euro. The TFEU mandates that their primary objective is price stability and their secondary objective is general support for the policies of the Union. The ECB achieves this through three main functions: monetary policy, banking supervision and prudential regulation, and economic policy support to the Union. Moving on to some key facts. As discussed in class, the EGD is the European Commission's new growth strategy to enable a green and just transition. It has been followed by legislation, including the climate law adopted in 2021, which established the framework for climate neutrality and amending regulations to meet EU climate objectives. The Sustainable Europe Investment Plan is the Commission's plan to finance the EGD through the official European budget, as well as instruments which will mobilise public and private actors. The main elements of the plan are firstly the multi-annual financial framework and the Next Generation EU Recovery Package, which together amounts to around €2 trillion. To address the enormous shortage of green investments, the InvestEU instrument will also leverage private and public actors, and there is ongoing work to update corporate climate-related disclosure regulations. Now going into some key concepts. Firstly, the economic implications of the climate crisis. The physical effects of climate change, as well as the transition effects of mitigation and adaptation policies, will have significant macroeconomic consequences on health, mortality, and labour productivity, while rapidly growing inequalities will be detrimental to growth. These climate risks also have adverse implications for financial stability. Physical risks from the increased frequency and severity of natural disasters, as well as our dependency on fossil fuels, will result in worsening inflationary pressures. Insurers will face higher costs, while banks face asset impairment, including lower profitability of businesses most exposed to climate risk. Secondly, transition risks from, for example, high carbon taxes or a scarcity of minerals critical for renewable energies will also have inflationary consequences, while balance sheets could be faced with, for example, stranded fossil fuel assets. An important concept is independence. Central banks are traditionally independent to remove any short-term political influence, and so ongoing debate centers around maintaining this during the green transition. The crux of the debate is that as the ECB increases interest rates to calm inflation, green investments become less competitive. For example, offshore wind plants may face a rise in the levelized cost of electricity due to the fact that fossil fuel plants have lower upfront capital costs. So as monetary policy tightening seems contradictory to decarbonisation in the short term, some argue that it also works against price stability in the long term due to climate inflation. However, central banks have affirmed that high inflation raises the effective tax on all investments, making price stability a precondition for the transition. I'll now start exploring the policy framework, and we must first ask the question, is the ECB within its mandate to incorporate climate considerations? The climate law references relevant institutions and includes requirements to submit policies to the Commission for progress monitoring. As the ECB cannot create union policy, and this would also imply that ECB objectives could be changed through ordinary legislative procedure, which is unacceptable, the ECB is not bound directly by this law. However, under the TFEU, enabling the green transition is a required collective effort, and as such, the ECB is committed within its mandate to incorporate climate considerations. The ECB's Climate Action Plan details how climate change considerations will be incorporated. Firstly, regarding monetary policy operations, the ECB will decarbonise its corporate bond holdings via a flow-based tilting mechanism, which directs purchases towards assets from issuers with higher climate scores. However, the ECB has halted all new purchases, which means only reinvestment flows will be affected, and so decarbonisation will actually greatly depend on existing bonds. Instead, a stock-based tilting approach would have actively shifted holdings towards green issuers. The ECB also aims to decarbonise its sovereign bond holdings. Though tilting based on a nation's carbon performance is limited, the ECB could go towards supranational institutions which still meet the capital key and have a larger fraction of green bonds, or just encourage governments to expand their supply of green bonds. This tilting mechanism moves away from the concept of market neutrality, i.e. following existing market structure to avoid any distortion of asset pricing, and instead adopts market efficiency, which argues that there is an inefficient allocation of resources as the market has failed to factor in climate externalities. The ECB also aims to green its lending by incorporating climate-related risks into credit assessment, thus limiting the use of assets with large carbon footprints, which can be used as collateral. However, a greater systematic greening of the collateral framework is required, which could include, for example, introducing green-targeted lending operations. Secondly, we look at changes to banking supervision and prudential regulations. A key action is that the ECB will publish experimental statistical indicators to improve its modelling capabilities, and so be able to accurately include climate-related fiscal policies into its future predictions. However, a recent Inspire policy briefing additionally recommended greater cooperation across disciplines. Importantly, the ECB conducted its first economy-wide NGFS climate scenario analysis in 2021 to determine euro exposure to climate risks, and has published minimum supervisory expectations with full compliance expected by the end of 2024. These tests and expectations are an important prudential policy tool and builds on the concept of double materiality. Finally, the Eurosystem is leading by example by taking a common stance on climate-related sustainable investments and disclosure in their own non-monetary policy portfolios from 2023 onwards. To finish up, I'll briefly touch on the international dimensions of green central banking. Firstly, the Network for Greening the Financial System has emerged as a crucial international coalition of central banks and supervisors to address climate-related risks and green finance. With 121 members, including the ECB, the network has released various reports and practical tools to share best practices and guidelines, many of which the ECB has already included into its framework. Of course, central banks vary greatly around the world in terms of independence, mandates, and approaches to sustainability. For example, the US Federal Reserve has a dual mandate of price stability and full employment. Another example is the Reserve Bank of New Zealand, which has recently incorporated native Māori concepts of stewardship and guardianship of the New Zealand economy into its policy framework, with the environment inherently becoming a key consideration. To conclude, if we want to truly implement a successful green transition, the world requires a deeply fundamental shift in how we view the environment. Central banks, though traditionally conservative, have often blurred the lines of their mandates when necessary, and as the climate crisis worsens, sustainability must become inherent in every aspect of our decision-making. So thank you for listening, and please refer to the accompanying report or additional resources for further information.